All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order in respect of everybody's time. Happy July 23rd. So we're here today to convene the meeting of the Civics Education, Civic Engagement, and Media Literacy Task Force. Thank you all for being here today. We've kind of, the chairs have decided that we should probably open each of these meetings now with any good civic news. So if any members of the task force have any positive stories from local communities or things that they've been working on that they'd like to share, we take this time to kind of open up the floor to those stories before we get into the bulk of the meeting. So does anybody have any positive civic stories that they would like to share? And it's perfectly fine if you don't. That's why we're here, right?
How about negative civic stories? We could go with, no, I'm kidding.
There's certainly enough going on in the world right now that we could. Well, go ahead, Ken Lesser.
I'll mention two things. One, there was an article editorial in today's Hartford about the value of civic engagement. Talked about a Hartford group that I think everyone would benefit from reading. And I'll just mention my friend to my left, Sally, who helps run the Kid Governor program. And we borrowed heavily from that in Wethersfield to have the Kid Mayor program. We launched it this year. And among other things, we brought all the student mayors here to learn about democracy and civic engagement. And a lot of it is borrowed on the great program. So, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback from our kid mayors on things we can do to improve things in town, but just getting them involved at a young age has a lot of value, them learning about civics and democracy.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Any other stories of civic engagement from your respective communities? Sally Whipple.
This is probably an odd choice for your question, but I was at a funeral last Friday, and it was really wonderful to see people in the community coming together to celebrate somebody's life and sharing stories about them, and then sharing stories about life in their community. And I thought that was a really great example of ordinary civics in action. People just coming together, talking, remembering, and thinking about community. And I thought that was really wonderful.
That is a great example, if not an odd example, but yeah, I think you're right. Oftentimes you see the value of somebody's civic participation when they pass because members of these different organizations that they belong to or participated with come out in support of the family. And so that is an excellent example. So thank you.
We had a group in Sherman, Connecticut earlier this year called Golden Bridge, and the concept that we were trying to establish was to get a group of Shermanites together for civil discourse. And what we tried to do, and we were somewhat successful, we tried to get a group of people that we knew were pretty much on the extreme right, and a group of people that were anywhere from the middle to the extreme left, and bring them together and see if we just see what the best way to approach a group discussion was with that. And as it turned out, we settled on a kind of a plan of 6 different meetings when we would take one subject at each meeting. At the end, it turned out that one of the subjects we were all interested in was energy conservation and so on and so forth. And we kind of went off in that direction. We stopped working on our original plan. But I happened to meet with some of these people just a couple of days ago, and we were talked about getting it together again, and really working hard on coming up with some good plan, or bridging divides, if you will, that we could pass on to people in other towns around us. I don't know whether how far we'll get with it, but we're thinking of starting it up again. And it's a good idea. The problem was we didn't get the real extremes. We got people who are already prepared to compromise and discuss things, and we couldn't get the hardcore from either end, but we'll work on it.
How did you recruit them?
Just people we knew from various organizations that we belonged to in town, Veterans Organization, the Artists Association, all kinds of groups that when we meet and, chatting about the subject of the organization, the conversation obviously this time gets into politics and what's going on. So we'd hope through that to pick out some people that thought had some extreme ideas. And we'll see.
Thank you, Ted, for that. I think one of the dangers in the lax nature of maybe some of the civic education engagement that's been going on in the past number of years is that you lose the ability to have those conversations. And yet the conversations are where you find the solutions, those bipartisan solutions from people on both sides of the political spectrum to come together to have the discussion. When you have the discussion, that's where you find the common ground in the middle. And so I appreciate the work that you are doing in Sherman, and hopefully we can replicate that the state over.
Just something that, I work at the State Department of Ed with social studies and civics and all, and just something that I'm working on and with others for the start of the school year is to hopefully provide some advice and some guidance to teachers on how to teach, quite honestly, the upcoming election, which to some teachers is a terrifying thing, to be perfectly honest with you. So if anybody here would want to be part of that effort or has some ideas on some strategies or approaches, please let me know. Thank you.
Steve, I'm glad you mentioned that because as I think I mentioned it at the last meeting, and I've spoken to you about this before, one of my main interests in being involved with this group is to see if we can't get our U.S. history and or civics courses to incorporate more current affairs. I think I would love to see that brought up to date. I know it's going to be very, very difficult to do because of the controversial nature of the current affairs. But I think the best way we can really turn the corner on getting people educated is to get the youth involved in discussing what's going on today, preferably nationally. And I think if we could, as I've said before, if we could do that, and if we could have maybe written homework assignments with what we used to call weekly readers, as I mentioned before, to bring home after school, talk with the parents over dinner, and start the move from the bottom up. I think we'd go a long way. I really do. I don't know what the answer is, but it seems to me that we should be spending a good part of our history and civics time talking about what's going on currently, as opposed to, or not in place of, but in addition to the history and the great events and forces that made our country great. We should be talking about the events and forces that are making us greater and that are making us less great right now.
Thank you. Any last thoughts or comments on civic events in their communities? Sure.
Jason, I'm wondering if you might, this could be a 3-hour presentation, but I'm guessing there's folks in the room that are not that familiar with America 250 in Connecticut. And I'm wondering if just in a brief, you could give folks that aren't familiar with it, just some background.
Thanks, Steve. So Jason Mancini, Executive Director of Connecticut Humanities and the Vice Chair of the state's Semi-Quincentennial Commission, or the 250th. The commission was chartered about 2 years ago as an executive order. In part, the charge of the commission is to engage our citizenry around not just the events of the creation of the Declaration of Independence, but to also engage scholars and the public around civic health. The themes of the commission are doing history, or really digging into the documents and learning the interpretive process, the power of place. I have to remember them all. Telling inclusive stories and for the common good. And I think with that last one, I think as much as we often frame independence as sort of a value in this country, certainly through the Declaration, but independence in our personal and family lives, we sometimes forget the things that bind us together, that for the common good piece. And I think that's the thing that I'm particularly interested in through the work of the commission, is how to find the threads of that fabric that we need to reweave and mend together. Steve, that wasn't 3 hours, but I hope a quick, pithy statement.
Thank you, Jason. It's an excellent work and program. So looking forward to the work that you all do. So with that, I think we will move along in the agenda here. And the first item that we have listed is a presentation by the Connecticut Bar Association, and our own task force member, Jonathan Weiner, is going to make some remarks, and we will go from there.
Excuse me, do we have copies of the agenda? Oh, I didn't pick it up. Sorry.
My apologies to the committee members for not sharing the agenda out earlier or getting you the copies in front of you before the meeting started. As you'll see, the agenda is relatively light, but we want to have time to be able to discuss based off of the presentations that are made. So now, without further ado, we'll turn it back over to Jonathan and the Bar Association.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Weiner. I am the co-chair of the Civics Education Committee of the Connecticut Bar Association. And I'd like to just discuss some of our programs today. The Bar Association has numerous civics education programs, some of which come under the umbrella of the Civics Education Committee. Others come under the Young Lawyers section or our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee as well, but they all sort of function under the same ecosystem. And they're intended to explain the legal system, provide some orientation to basic legal concepts, both the United States Constitution, broader rule of law principles, and then right down to rules of evidence procedure in some of the programs. There's also an extensive pipeline aspect to all of our programs. In the end, what we would like to do is we'd like to foster participation by young people in particular in the legal system and encourage those to go get a legal education. We also have programs in place that are designed to lower barriers to folks ultimately pursuing a legal education. So if students come through our programs and decide that they would like to go to college and on to law school, we actually have some scholarship funds that are available through our Future Legal Profession program to allow them to take that next step, get LSAT prep, and go on to law school. But before then, we have a lot of programs. I'm proud to say that all are heavily volunteer driven. We have minimal staff administrative support for all of them. The heavy lifting on all of these programs is done by probably a good 100 judges, lawyers, and law students who are actively involved in all of them. Some volunteer for multiple programs. But I would say our most recent one, and one that it occurred to me was some good civics news, is CBA Law Camp. So Law Camp is a program that was founded by then Superior Court Judge Angela Robinson back in 2011. And it was primarily a DEI-oriented program that was intended to introduce students to the legal system. And we get mostly upper middle school to younger high school students as part of that program. And when that program runs in person, all the kids come together and they have counselors who are law students or younger attorneys. And they get a complete orientation to the legal system. So I spend an afternoon with them discussing basically an introduction to Connecticut's courts and general legal principles. Then they get into a small mock trial exercise, and they have a small mock trial competition that's ultimately judged by the Chief Justice of the state. Along the way, they get a lot of hands-on work. They get the opportunity to visit court proceedings. They see mediations, and they also spend a lot of times in law firms. Before COVID, we were running it in person in both New Haven and in Hartford. After COVID, unfortunately, we had to go to Zoom, which the kids, I think, the kids did really well with it. I think some of the faculty members kind of chafed at not being in person. So our good civics news was this year, we were finally back in person down in New Haven, and the kids had an incredible week. And the amount of interest we heard from them in terms of emails that went to the lawyer counselors, including myself, saying, tell me more about the other programs. I want to be a lawyer. What do I need to do? How do I find an internship? Was just really, encouraging, and, it was heartwarming to hear from a lot of them. Our largest in-person program then is our mock trial competition, which was formerly sponsored by Civics First. The mock trial competition is heavily supported by the judicial branch through the provision of facilities, including our courtrooms. It runs all year with our case release in the fall for the high school level, as well as the middle school level. And what it is it's an intense immersion in the rules of evidence and in substantive law. And we try and give the kids an original problem that focuses on an issue of the day. This year's high school problem was the fallout of a contract dispute that was caused by COVID restrictions. The bride and groom didn't like the restrictions that were being put on them by the wedding venue during reopening. And so we discussed, contract principles, and the kids really had to get into it. Teams have volunteer legal and faculty advisors, and they are organized primarily on the basis of school. We currently have 48 high school teams and 23 or 24 middle school teams. A key feature of this is that all the kids have the opportunity to compete in real courtrooms across the state of Connecticut. At the high school level, we have regions. I think we have 7 regions around the state where they compete. Those that progress will then go on to our statewide playoff tournament that's held in Bridgeport and New Britain. And then they ultimately go to our semifinal round in Middletown and on to our finals of the state Supreme Court. Our state champion team then represents us at the National High School Mock Trial Championship. This year was held in Wilmington, Delaware. We have the middle school competition. Like I said, has 24 students, 24 teams. It runs similarly. The kids don't get into court until the playoffs, but it's a really good immersion for them. And the middle school kids are fun to watch because they're fearless. And it's good to see kids who might otherwise be awkward just shed all of that as they get up and they make their opening statement and ultimately, question witnesses. And it's a lot of fun for everybody involved. And one thing we're proud of this year is that we now have funding available to assist teams with transportation and faculty advisor expenses through a fund that was endowed in honor of the career of Judge F. Herbert Grindell, who is retired from the appellate court. He was an elementary school teacher and principal for 14 years before moving on and becoming a lawyer and a judge. So in his honor, we now have a fund endowed that's intended to support that activity and lower any kind of barriers to participation. Beyond that, we're heavily involved with the Judicial Branch Civics Academy. That's organized through our Young Lawyers section, where we work with the branch to send young lawyers out to partner with judges and visit classrooms at the elementary level. We also have our annual Law Day ceremony, which commemorates Law Day on May 1st of each year. We hold that in the appellate court. And again, we always have a hands-on civics education component discussing an issue of the day centered around the ABA theme, which of course this year was the election. We had our students discuss election reforms along with expansions of the right to vote. Our critical partner in that one, along with the appellate court, is the Office of the Secretary of State. Starting when Denise Merrill was Secretary of State, she really took a leading role in working with us to provide access for the kids to the Capitol. We have, they would get a Capitol tour and usually, an opportunity to meet and greet folks here as part of that program afterwards. And Stephanie Thomas has really, gone a long way in continuing that as well. So we're proud of that partnership. Another program is Constitution Day, which again, more classroom visits. That's being revived and piloted this year. And the plan is to visit middle schools to discuss principles of the United States Constitution. My co-chair, Lawrence Maurizio, has actually rewritten our curriculum to make it more relevant and more accessible to our volunteers. And then finally, the pinnacle of our civics education offerings is the Ralph J. Monaco Memorial Award. That award is given in memory of our past president, Ralph J. Monaco, who passed away too young a few years ago. Ralph was really a leader in civics education in Connecticut, and he made civics the centerpiece of his presidency. He was both my predecessor and co-chair of the Civics Education Committee, and we give a scholarship in his memory to 3 high school seniors for outstanding work in civics education and community leadership. And that is the highlight of the Law Day ceremony. This year, we're working on expanding our repertoire to adult education. We've covered a lot of ground with younger people, but we found that we're not quite reaching adults. And, of course, when there's a major court case, everybody becomes an armchair lawyer. Everybody's a constitutional expert. So we're working on using library visits and the use of social media to explain legal issues of the day and provide neutral, factually accurate explanations, just to give folks the background of what's going on if there's a contemporary legal issue. Maybe a major U.S. Supreme Court decision. And I think the key is going to be disseminating that probably through our social media channels. But we're excited about that development. That's going to happen likely over the course of this year. But yeah, so those are the various offerings of the Connecticut Bar Association. And like I said, we're extremely proud that they're all volunteer driven. And it just shows the commitment of our bar and bench to civics education. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Jonathan, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the work that you're all doing at the Bar Association. Are there any questions from members of the task force?
John, what's the actual connection of the bar itself to this? Is it just a place? Does the bar itself have a role?
Well, I think part of the mission of the Bar Association is advancing the rule of law. And part of that is a public education component. So civics education fits within our overall mission. And these programs are all components of that. And then, of course, promoting the practice of law and developing the next generation go along with that as well. And it's just nice that all these pieces do fit together. And I think one of the things we're going to be looking at as an association is finding a way to coordinate all these pieces that are sort of flying separately and really finding a way to make sure that they all work together. But but the Bar Association is committed to civics education as part of our mission of protecting and advancing the rule of law.
What does a student have to do to get involved with any of these various programs that you mentioned?
Primarily, the programs are school oriented, which is something that it's both a feature and a bug. In terms of the feature, doing it through the schools makes it easy to package the programs and get them out there. The issue we see, though, is that a lot of times we have students who approach us and say, hey, I want to do mock trial. How do I get involved? And then so of course, the follow-up question is, where do you go to school and what can we do? And we then have to try and reach out to the school administration to market the program. And that really goes for any of these programs. So, it's hard to reach the students without active participation from the schools. And if the schools aren't able to cooperate or aren't able to find the resources to support them, it's difficult for us to reach, to really reach the kids. So that's really the challenge we have in terms of reaching students and reaching new kids is they can approach us and we can give them the tools that they need to link up with this, with a principal, and we'll reach out to principals and superintendent on their behalf, but ultimately they've got to find somebody in their community who's willing to support them.
Thank you.
Do you at the beginning of the school year? Do you try to contact the school? I mean, halfway through the school year, if you've got a good idea, it's pretty hard, I would imagine, for you to get that incorporated into the curriculum. So I assume you contact the superintendent or the principal, the assistant principal. From what I've found out, the curriculum can be in different hands, and you got to get the right person. And I have had, even my local area, difficulty, finally accomplish it, getting in touch and getting an audience with some of these people. But I'm not speaking for the Bar Association, but I wonder, what's the secret of your success?
I mean, the secret of our success really is word of mouth. And, we do, we of course do publicize what we're doing. In terms of some of the programs like mock trial in particular.
Yeah.
Where it's been very successful, but I would also say it's been successful at a certain level. We can't have more trials than we have courtrooms. So we're very careful with the growth of that program in particular, just because we don't want to have, we market it, but not aggressively. We'll never turn anybody away who comes to us, but I would describe the program right now as pleasantly full. We're around capacity for that program, but ultimately, for the others, we'll reach, we reach out to our contacts both through mock trial and through the Civics Academy and see who is interested, and we'll then get our volunteers out there. But the only one that's really a capacity issue is mock trial. But again, it's and that's just one where we're very careful because we don't want to compromise the quality of the program by overgrowing it.
Could I just offer a couple of thoughts? So I know from having conversations with John and Sally and Brian and others, there are an abundance of programs. I think some of the limitations that we have in front of us are there's a lack of centralization, no surprise in Connecticut. The systems and structures that could be sort of bringing us together in a more cohesive, connected way, I think we want for, of course, funding. But I do wonder, as John was speaking, some of these programs are really important, but I wonder about the students that aren't getting it. I think a lot about Eastern Connecticut, I think about the cities, and how can we have a greater impact in those communities. But I think it's really sort of articulating the systems that we need to put in place. And I might ask Sally if she has some thoughts on this, because she does run these programs, and I think in consort with John on Civics First, what this could look like or how it could be more effective in the work that we're doing.
I'm hoping that through Red, White, and Blue Schools, we partner with the Secretary of the State's office and with the State Department of Education, and we're supported by Connecticut Humanities in this. Red, White, and Blue Schools is a program that it designates schools throughout and districts throughout the state as schools that are really doing well teaching civics. They are excellent. And it's been a great program in place for a while, but now with some funding, we are able to really put a finer focus on how we're helping schools with that. So we will be creating a larger presence of resources on our website page. We will be working with teachers and schools to help them figure out the best resources to use and how they can really improve civics within their schools or districts. So I think it's going to be, overall doing outreach to places that really aren't getting the message about the programs requires a lot of personal contact. That's really important. But I think that I'm hoping that Red, White, and Blue Schools will become sort of a one-stop shopping place for civic programming, so that people, we can get the word out so people will know to go there for help with professional development, with resources from all of the great programs that John does and everybody else does at the judicial branch everywhere. But you're right, it's hard for teachers to know where are the programs, what are the programs, and which ones are the best quality. for their students. So I am hoping that that will be a real portal that will also direct people to Teach It, where they can find on the Connecticut Humanities Teach It website lesson plans that they can use in the classroom and access easily. I think that the more support we can provide for teachers in a variety of ways, the better for them.
And to Jason's point, in terms of the geographic disparities, I would say that for mock trial program in particular, we've identified Eastern Connecticut as our number one area of interest for expansion. We do really well in Fairfield County, really well in the greater Hartford area. And we have an increasing presence in the cities, and that's largely a product of the law camp program. But we would like to get out to Eastern Connecticut and possibly have an Eastern Connecticut region again. I can see that being, I can see Tolland or Wyndham working really well for that.
And I would just like to add that Civics Now and one other group, I can't remember which one, has done a whole study on equity in civics education. And they supply a report on that, white papers on that, and they have different pamphlets that are directed to school officials, people in a community, legislators, so that they can get across the message to a variety of people why civics is so important and why equity in civics education is so important. And so I think that's a valuable resource to look at and follow.
Can I just add a quick aside? Connecticut has a really rich history in our civic foundations in this country. And I would encourage everybody, I don't think I mentioned this in our last meeting, but in the hallway connecting the legislative office building at Concourse, there's an exhibit called An Orderly and Decent Government. And it really rolls through Connecticut's brilliant history as a constitution state through the colonial period to today. So I would encourage, we now, Connecticut Humanities participate in creating that, and it is now online as well, so people can check it out there if you're watching from home. But if you're here in this building, it's a good reminder of what we've done as a community here.
Thank you all. And I'm glad, and I would want to reiterate the points that were made about civic education being an equity issue, that we need to be intentional about teaching of civics, and we need to be intentional about the equity in the teaching of civics as well, because the overall goal is to get more civic participation. And unfortunately, all too often where we see the lower participation rates, it's in places where they have had less access. And so it's an issue of equity and access. And so I appreciate that that was brought up today. So thank you.
And along with equity, as anybody that's ever tried to put a program in a school knows, you've got to have that one champion in the school as well. That without that one champion, the one person that's going to say, I'll do this, it's really hard to do that. And hopefully, as Sally said, with more PR on things like Red, White, and Blue and John's programs, hopefully those champions, at least the champions, will know that the programs exist to a higher level, I think.
I think one of the other issues is in terms of those champions, I think a lot of those champions are very overextended as well. So I think, I think we keep finding the same champion over and over again.
Okay, thank you. Angela Parkinson.
Hello. I'm thinking about this from the teacher's perspective as one of those overextended people. You get all these emails, including Red, White, and Blue schools, and I'm already running the young Dems at my school, and I delete them. It's terrible because I can't do it all. So I'm trying to think about from the inside out, how can you get to us? And my first thought is it needs to be on a PD day, and then we need to get out of our PD and go to your PD. So I'm thinking if we have all these different programs going on, I'm thinking of like a club fair for the teachers where you all are there. It's a few hours or a full day, maybe, or 2 half days that you could do either half. And the teachers come like the kids would, and we learn about and do like short participations in all the different programs. And it just for social studies teachers, it would be great if it was one from each school. I mean, whatever, or you could target different places. So then I'm like, okay, problem is schools have PD on different days, right? But then I was thinking the one day that most schools have PD is election day. And so I don't know, And then, of course, once you decide all that and set it up, then it becomes personal outreach, showing up, making the phone calls to get those people from schools. But, and also Board of Ed members can be your way in, maybe. So those are my thoughts I've been thinking about while you were talking.
Thank you. Any last questions for John or thoughts on the topic in the Connecticut Bar Association? Allison Chandler.
Just thinking about getting into those communities that are hard to reach. For us, running the Civics Academy, having faculty who live in those committees has made the biggest difference for us. I have emailed certain superintendents and principals 1,000 times and have heard nothing. I have an attorney in that community. She called someone she knew, and all of a sudden we were in all their schools. And that's the thing that makes the difference, is having our folks in those communities already.
So much of civic engagement is about who you know, right? And making those connections and those personal connections. I mean, that's what politics certainly is all about. So anything civic engagement related, you're going to have an easier time with it when you have people that you know that are in those communities. So it's a great idea. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? All right. With that said, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a presentation on civic seals by our own task force member, Sally Whipple, and then Brian Cofrancesco, both from the Connecticut Democracy Center. So we'll give them a second to get set up.
While they're getting it up, Civic Seals is, I will tell you, this is something that the, working at the Connecticut State Department of Ed, this is something that potentially we're interested in supporting, and we're interested in helping the sponsor. So we'd really like, as you hear this presentation and in other presentations, what do you think should be in a Civic Seal program? What do you think about the Civic Seals program? We're very, very interested in hearing your responses and your reactions.
So we'll turn the floor over to Sally and Brian.
Thank you very much. As you were just told, Sally Whipple, Brian Cofrancesco, we work for the Connecticut Democracy Center. I'm the executive director of Connecticut's Old State House, and Brian is the director of the Kid Governor Program. So based on a discussion at our last meeting, we were asked to provide a presentation on civic seals and how they might benefit Connecticut students and teachers and schools. So we're here today to give you that information. And what we're going to do is explain what seals are, talk a little bit about ways that the program can be supported in Connecticut, and then we'll provide examples of civic seal diploma programs from other states. So diploma seals are not unique to civics. There are many kinds of different diploma seals throughout the United States, and they are in a variety of disciplines. Their goal is to provide an incentive for students to exceed minimum graduation requirements and to reward students who demonstrate a high level of proficiency in the seal discipline. And it is actually very often a physical seal on a diploma, but also information in the student transcript that says they've earned this seal. So the seals on the transcripts and diplomas send a message to institutions of higher learning and to employers that a student has gone above and beyond school requirements to excel in a field that they care about. Connecticut has one diploma seal so far. The Connecticut General Assembly passed legislation calling for a seal of biliteracy in 2017. And then the State Board of Education established the criteria for earning the seal. And today it's a very successful program across the state, and it could serve as a good model for a Connecticut civic seal program should the state decide to do that.
Okay, so civic seals are among several state civic education policies that are endorsed by the National Council for the Social Studies and Civics Now. which is the policy arm of the organization iCivics, which you may be familiar with. Both groups believe that SEALs can raise the profile of civic education across the country. And in general, Civic SEALs require students to demonstrate, as Sally said, a high level of proficiency in civics, which may include civic knowledge, or so the understanding of government systems, institutions, processes, history, economics, and even geography. Civic skills and knowing how to help their communities and be active participants in the world. And civic dispositions, so students' desire to pay attention, to care, to ask, how can I help? And to think about how actions in a community affect everyone. So the very first Civic Seal was Virginia's Seal of Excellence in Civics Education, which was implemented in 2003. So now, 21 years later, Civics Diploma Seals programs are popping up all around the country. 7 other states have implemented their own unique state programs, including California, Nevada, Arizona, Kentucky, Ohio, Georgia, and New York. In addition to those, Oklahoma, Indiana, and North Carolina have approved Civic Seals programs and are still developing their requirements, plus a number of states who are working towards Civic Seals or exploring the possibility of bringing them to their states. Every state takes a different and unique path to establishing Civic Seals, and we'll provide you with some examples of those in just a moment. But first, we want to tell you about why we care about this particular project.
We really do care about the Civic Seals project. And one reason I think was just sort of demonstrated in the conversation we just had. I think even having a conversation about Civic Seals and what they might look like in Connecticut is a great way for people to talk about what they think civics is and how we can help students be better civically engaged, and adults as well. So our organization, the Connecticut Democracy Center, is committed to inspiring people of all ages to engage in civic life and strengthen their communities. And we envision a society where everyone is empowered to participate in our democracy. Our goal is to provide people in Connecticut with a lifetime pathway to civic engagement. And so we offer programs for students at all grade levels, starting as very young with Connecticut's Kid Governor in 5th grade, going to History Day, We the People, debate tournaments, both of those last 2 programs, gifts to us from Civics First, who has ran those for years and really did a lot to teach kids about the Constitution and about the importance of debate and the skills of debate. And we also have civic field trips to Connecticut's Old State House. We also provide programs for adults through public programming and events and tours of Connecticut's Old State House and TV streaming coverage of Connecticut state government and policy on the Connecticut Network. The Connecticut Network and the Old State House are 2 of our flagship projects that we manage in partnership with the Connecticut General Assembly. So as you see, we really like civics. We have just become the Connecticut state affiliate for Civics Now, and we have the exciting charge of forming a coalition of organizations and people who want to support our students, teachers, and schools through quality civic education programming. Brian is on Civics Now's planning committee for the 3rd annual National Civic Learning Week, which is a week-long celebration of civic learning across the country. And we've already also talked a little bit this morning about red, white, and blue, this afternoon about red, white, and blue. Since 2016, this program, in partnership with the State Department of Education and the Secretary of the State's office, has been providing resources and professional and development and encouraging schools and districts to really raise the level of civic education in their areas. And as I said before, I think that red, white, and blue could be really helpful going forward if we were to pursue a Connecticut Civic Seals program. When we first heard about Civic Seals, we really thought that it would be a great way to bring all of our organizations together across the state, John's and Judicial Branch, and many, many other groups who teach civics and promote civics, to bring them all together and really focus on ways that we can help teachers, help students, and help districts with raising the profile of civic education and increasing civic learning without The nice thing about civic seals is that you can increase civic learning without creating new requirements and without adding a new budget line. It can be done, I think, very well, as we've seen across the country, with support from organizations like the ones we've been discussing. So we really think that if we were to do civic seals, it would be a wonderful way for organizations to support and make the lift easier for anyone who chooses to do a civic seal program.
So what exactly are civics diploma seals? As we alluded to, they're potentially actual seals on a diploma, notes on transcripts that are acknowledging students who demonstrate a high level of proficiency in civics. And again, it's not just the knowledge, but it's also having the skills to be civically engaged. No two states have identical criteria. And while the goal is to identify students individually, some states recognize districts or individual schools, similar to our recognition program in the red, white, and blue schools. So civic seals themselves are known by different names across the country. Some states call them civics literacy seals, civic engagement seals, civic readiness seals, and there are several others as well. And every state goes about defining and structuring their civic seals programs in their own way. So while the requirements for earning seals vary from state to state, they do draw on a couple core basic requirements that they have chosen that really best meet the needs of their state's education system. So most require proficiency in at least two of the following categories. Completion of already required history or social science courses, which gives students an immediate check mark in working towards advancing this because they're fulfilling what's already expected of them. Several states require service learning or civic engagement, projects at school or with a community-based organization in their town. And in some states, this also includes enlisting them in the military, counting towards service learning. Several states require a capstone project that lets students demonstrate civic involvement in conjunction with their proficiency in coursework, while others use civic portfolios to reflect your civic education and engagement work over a school year or sometimes over multiple years. And some states also require students to pass standardized assessments, often a state-developed civics test or the U.S. citizenship test. And I'll quickly go over some examples of specific states. We're going to profile Arizona, California, and Kentucky and how they run their civic seals programs. So first up, Arizona's Seal of Civic Literacy was implemented in the 2019-2020 school year. Students can work towards achieving Arizona's seal requirements at any point in grades 9 to 12. The one exception is that the Arizona civics test can be completed prior to 9th grade. And the requirements for achieving the state's seal of civic literacy include coursework. So you must complete all required social studies courses with a GPA of 3.0 out of 4.0, 30 hours of unpaid community service. Arizona does have a standardized assessment, and students must score 70% or better on the Arizona civics test. They have a civic learning component, and students must participate in 3 approved programs. And you can see some examples on the screen, some of which we have here in Connecticut as well. Civic engagement, and they require participation in 2 approved activities: Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Key Club, AmeriCorps. And their final component is a written reflection for students to reflect on their experience in being involved civically and in earning the seal. So that's Arizona. California's Seal of Civic Engagement was implemented in the 2020-2021 school year. Their seal is for students in grades 11 and 12, so they focus on those last 2 years of high school, but they also allow districts to create their own recognition programs for students in other grades. And California actually has legislation proposed right now that would increase civic learning opportunities in grades 1 through 8 to introduce the idea of a civic seal to younger students who may want to work towards it when they get to high school. So California created broader requirements than what Arizona did And that gives school districts more flexibility to create their own local requirements. And so their requirements are that students must be engaged in academic work in a productive way, which can mean a number of things, including attending class, being on track to graduate, things along those lines. When it comes to knowledge and skills, the students need to demonstrate a competent understanding of the US and California constitutions, local, state, and tribal governments, the role of citizens in constitutional democracy, and democratic principles, concepts, and processes. And students can achieve this in California by completing what's already required with their required history and social science courses in world history, US history, and American government, and by earning a passing grade as determined by their local district. For civic engagement, they must participate in one or more civic engagement projects that address real-world problems. And that's a big component in a lot of states, a project that's addressing a real issue. And so students need to identify and explore a need in their community. They need to look at various perspectives and sources. Then they need to take some level of informed action, and then they need to reflect on their process and experience. And the goal of this component is to encourage students to engage with their local community in a way that goes beyond just volunteering for an organization, so that they're addressing a real issue or individual problem in the community. And then they need to demonstrate civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions through reflection, and whether it's a written reflection, an oral reflection, multimedia, a capstone project or portfolio. It's an opportunity for students to really think about and internalize what their experience has been to hopefully lead to lifelong engagement. And finally, students need to exhibit the character traits that reflect civic mindedness, and that can be through part of the reflections or letters of recommendations or even videos. And unlike Arizona, California has no requirements for community service hours or for standardized assessments. And the final state that we'll talk about is Kentucky, whose Civic Seal was just implemented this past school year. Kentucky's seal is unique because it recognizes all grades, K through 12, and students can earn that seal at their elementary, middle, or high school commencements. Their requirements are broad, especially broad, so that students at all grade levels can achieve them depending on what their curriculum might be, but also where they are in the learning process. So first, students must create or engage in a civic engagement project that addresses a real-world issue. And again, it involves identifying a problem, researching it, taking a level of action, and applying their findings to something beyond their classroom. Students must demonstrate knowledge and applied understanding of the different levels of government and of democratic principles. And so this can be completing what's already required through your school coursework, or demonstrating mastery of Kentucky's academic standards for social studies, or even creating a student portfolio. Students need to demonstrate information literacy by regularly finding, evaluating, and using credible sources. And finally, there's that reflection component that students need to think about and reflect on their civic learning processes, what they did, the successes, the challenges, to show their growth in civics.
We thought we'd talk a little bit about some of the benefits of Civic Seals for students. It challenges and inspires students to go beyond course requirements. They receive recognition for volunteer work that they are already doing. And in some cases, for example, in New York, you can apply something that you've done in the past to your Civic Seal by reflecting on it and helping people understand the civic lessons you learned from that volunteer work. It's an incentive to participate in programs such as the Civics Academy, the programs done by CBA, tours at the Capitol and the State Library. And it helps make meaningful connections to America 250. And at this point, if Civic Seals legislation was put forward in Connecticut and approved in 2025, the first graduating class to earn the seal would be the class of 2026, in time for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. And benefits to the broader community, which I think are really important, particularly given what John said about how hard it is sometimes to reach adults and how they need civics as much as students do. it really highlights civics as an important area of study. So if you were to have students getting civic seals in your community, it wouldn't just be a seal on their diploma. You might have a townwide party where you recognize students who are really involved in civics, or something really that will grab everybody's attention, some way to celebrate that. It would really celebrate civic engagement and contributions that youth are making to their communities. And I think that's important because so many times you hear, oh, kids are disengaged, kids don't know, they don't care. And that's not true. And I think it raises those students up, elevates them so that people can see the youth contributions and be inspired by them. Again, it signals to colleges and employers when students are excelling in civics and civic engagement. And it provides civic organizations and others with opportunities to support schools through programming and resources and professional development for educators. I think that is so incredibly important because I know that teachers feel like they can't read every email. I do the same thing. I delete a lot of emails that I would like to read. There's just so much coming at you that I think it would be great for other organizations to step up and really help with that. There are some open questions going into thinking about civic seals. There are many questions. It would require a lot of careful thought and planning and conversation. Again, just to decide, what do we mean by civics? What do we in Connecticut think our students need to know, not just to be a graduate, but to be a graduate with a civic seal who is really ready to go down that lifetime pathway of civic engagement and working in their community and helping in their community. Some of the questions would be, what would Connecticut's civic seal be called? Everybody's got different names for them across the state. What grades would be able to earn credit toward a seal? We have seen that in some places, they let students work on civic seals through their whole school career. And in New York, they did, the first year they piloted it, they did it with 12th graders because they wanted instant gratification of being able to show students with civic seals, but realized that 12th grade is much too late because you also want to build up in anticipation of getting a civic seal among kids. And also students need those skills much earlier than 12th grade. Also thinking through the civic seal requirements and criteria. We saw a lot of different options in 3 different states. There are many more different ways that states are handling this, but the good thing is that this is something that you can really shape to fit your state and your state's needs, and you can change it over time if need be. You've got to see what fits your state, what fits your students, what fits the time. And then another big question is, who will assess student achievements of the requirements? Is that a classroom level thing, a district level thing? There are a lot of questions, and how do you introduce an optional program like this to schools and districts across the state without making it too onerous, making it with enough support and requirements that are broad enough that all students can participate if they so choose, so it's more equitable, but also easy enough so that it is not placing a big burden on educators and administrators. Should the state consider civic seals, planners can reference our own biliteracy seal for advice on how to do it, as well as civic seal models from the other states to form a unique Connecticut program that will meet our needs.
So that's our overview of civic seals. We're continuing our research and to explore civic seals and what that could look like in Connecticut. So if you have questions or ideas to share, please do reach out to Sally or me. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, both Sally and Brian, for that presentation. It certainly, to me, as a civics teacher, seems like a no-brainer, and hopefully it's something that we can work towards here. So with that presentation, I'll open the floor up to any questions to Brian or Sally to talk more about this. Thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you, Brian and Sally, for that presentation. And I was just wondering, in the states where they have the civic seals, do you know what proportion of students elect to apply for the Civic Seal? Or how many participate?
So we unfortunately don't have that data. Most of what we found is from researching things online, and most of the states don't have that information publicly available. But through our connections with Civics now, that's something we might be able to find more about, because that's a really important question about how many students actually pursue it. I think another aspect of it too is you saw in the different profiles, some states are more stringent and some are a little more broad in their requirements. So I think if the restrictions are very, if there are a lot of, not restrictions, if there's a lot of requirements, that might not encourage as many students to apply. So I think a lot of it would also come down to how detailed and how specific and how rigorous this process became as to how many students might pursue it.
Are those requirements set by legislation or through a regulation?
So what we've found in most states is that the creation or I guess directing the creation of a civic seal is done through legislation, and then the State Department in most states is the one who facilitates the actual creation of what those specifics are, and then the state's Board of Education approves what's been created.
And if you look at the Connecticut Biliteracy Seal, they have a whole webpage, right? They really go through the process. They give you a history of how it was done. And it's very helpful. And they also have a chart that shows how many students participated and how the program has grown. And if you would like, Brian and I can make up a list of resources for people with some of the things that we consulted when we were doing our research. And we'd be happy to share those with the commission, the task force.
Ted.
That was an excellent presentation, and I certainly agree with everything you said. It's wonderful. But Sally, you mentioned, you talked about raising the level of civics education. Now here I'm separating civics education from civic engagement. And you talk mostly about civic engagement as it relates to a seal, for example. I still am not convinced, haven't been convinced of anything we've been talking about that really raises the level of civics education per se without increasing requirements from a half credit, for example, for a diploma. Could you comment on that, on some of the, on where do you think we could go in addition to perhaps additional courses that would, how are we going to get more civics education? I look at the standards and the framework and I think they're excellent from what I see. I can't imagine how we could, except, marginally improve them without spending more time on it.
I guess I would say, so you're asking how we actually would improve civic education through it.
Yes, without improving the quantity of it. I mean, I think we have to improve the quantity of the civics education.
Well, yeah, civics, there is not a lot of time to teach civics.
That's the problem.
But I don't know that increasing course time for a civics class is the way to really improve civic education. I think it needs to be infused through the whole school career of a student so that the concepts, the ideas are there and they can be introduced to students over time. So it's something they become familiar with. And then then as time goes on, I think with support from other organizations, there can be things outside of class that improve civic education. So many students learn about leadership, about followership, which is just as important as leadership, by being in groups, not just like the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, groups like that are very important. But I think almost anytime you're volunteering with your community and you're observing and you're seeing how people behave in different situations, you are learning about those things.
Yeah,
and in
it's
some
educational, yeah.
yeah, and
I
in
agree
some
with you.
places, I think that idea of having students reflect on that as part of their civic seal work is really important, because I don't think we do that enough. Sometimes it's not until 30 years later, you realize, oh yeah, I learned that by observing this person who couldn't run a meeting when I was 10 years old. So I think I think it really does take a village to improve civic education. And it's something that isn't just going to be done with coursework, which is, I think, a positive part of this, the way most states are doing Civic Seals program. The coursework is good. It's a great entry point for anyone who wants a seal because they've got to take that course anyway. But there are other things that they can do, and students are doing a lot of these things already. This is just a way, in some cases, of corralling the things that they're learning or doing and identifying it as civics. Because I think we often don't recognize that things are civics when they are.
Good point.
Thanks.
If I could
Those
just
are all
add-
really good points. Sorry, Brian. I just want to add quickly to add to the village, if you will, Sally. The work that we're trying to do at Connecticut Humanities is really oriented around getting museums and cultural organizations to think about where their intersections are with school curriculum and beginning to build those bridges across.
If I could just add on to that too about, improving civic education. In my world of the Kid Governor program, which works with fifth grade teachers, you hear a lot about how an elementary teacher is not necessarily fully trained in social studies. They might be somebody with a language arts background or science or math. And I think that's why red, white, and blue schools and what we're trying to do with our partners at the State Department of Ed and the Secretary of State's office are important, because corralling the resources to make them more accessible so that, we talk a lot about civics as high school, but looking at interdisciplinary ways that you can teach civics, but as Sally said, in all grades, then we hopefully make it a little bit more appealing and accessible for a teacher who may not have a background in civics to call out what they're doing as civics education, or to implement or instill new lessons or new activities because they have the resources at their disposal.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. What's amazing to me, and it's a great learning for me, there's already a lot of good things that are happening. Jonathan spoke about in his presentation, what Jason's talking about, what the Connecticut Democracy Center is doing and what potentially Civic Seals can do. I'd almost wish we had a menu of these types of things, because I don't think people around the state of Connecticut, most people, have any idea. And I'm someone who's involved in a lot of these things, and I am learning so much just from the people around this table. And I would love if this group at some time could produce a menu or something like that. And specifically, I love the Civic Seals program. And I wanted to ask a specific question. The states that you profiled, like Kentucky, California, once the state legislature passes it, does the municipality need to sign up, and then their local school board, for example, would put this program in, and then students would sign up? How does it get from the state legislature down to the local community and down to the individual student level?
Great question. So after it goes through legislation, that's when the State Department works to figure out what the actual criteria or requirements would be. And then once that's all finalized, they tend to get into a routine of every August, September, they announce that year's program, and then they do outreach to districts typically, although some states have made it so that you don't have to be an entire school district. You could be one school within a district that says, we want to participate. And they tend to sign up online to notify the State Department of Education so they know where the interest is. And then it's often the district or school level that reaches out to their students, and they help the students move through the process of achieving the seal and then reporting back to the state level as to who has achieved it within their district.
Got it, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have
Could I just add a little on that? That what the procedure for this would be in Connecticut. As Brian and Sally said, there's already a model of this, the seal of biliteracy, which was passed and is being used in countless schools. So this proposal would go to the state legislature. We'd hopefully get a legislator or two who might be willing to write the legislation. And then from there, By the way, a thing that happens in many of these states is an effort has to be made to convince the State Department of Education to support this. Mercifully for us in Connecticut, we've passed that, right? The State Department of Ed is 100% behind this. So that is not a thing. But what happens after it's passed? It's then passed over to the State Department of Ed. And the State Department of Ed then, with colleagues such as everybody in this room, will sit down in groups, we'll sit down in focus groups, we'll sit down in groups, and we'll work over. I'm not in a position, here's what the Civic Seal is. I want to work with folks like yourself to determine what is the best Civic Seal for Connecticut. Sally, Brian, Jason, Ted, everybody in this room can have a say in what the Civic Seal will finally be. So, you know, it sort of lives in the State Department of Education once it's passed, but I would say that with vigorous input and more than input from everybody, from civic organizations, from would be the ones that would actually create the Civic Seal. Brian and Sally, is that a fair assessment from your end? Kevin, could you talk a little about what would be, do you think, the legislative, how would this be? I mean, you're only, maybe you're not guessing, but how will this, what's the legislative procedure for something like that?
Certainly. Thank you, Steve. So yes, basically what's already been described is how it would work. It would take legislators writing a bill that would introduce the concept of a civic seal. It would go through the committee process, I'm assuming starting with the Education Committee and then potentially other committees where there might be some jurisdiction over it. But then it would come to the floor of both houses for a vote, and assuming it would be to pass, then that's when, as has been said, it would go to the State Department of Education for the actual, figuring out of what needs to be in it. So yeah, exactly what has been described is pretty much what the situation would be in trying to bring this forward in Connecticut.
And Sally and Brian, in your research, what if any are obstacles that groups have found when they try to take it, or do you know that? What are obstacles that groups have when they try to get it passed?
The main one I've heard is that it gets wrapped up in an omnibus bill and then doesn't pass. But, and there was one state in particular where they brought it back the next year. It had a real champion in the legislature and it passed that year.
To that point, I would argue that that's exactly how this task force came to be. It got wrapped up in an omnibus bill, but it was in a positive omnibus bill that was highly supported in a bipartisan fashion. And so that's why we're here today. So my hope from the legislative perspective is that we would be able to do something very similar to get something like a seal proposed and then through the process to the point where the State Department of Ed could figure out the specifics.
I know that there's opposition in many circles for legislative things to be mandated. I think schools are reluctant to have things mandated. The beauty to me of this, if School X really didn't want to do it, for whatever reason, School X just doesn't do it. We'd encourage the heck out of it, but this would not be a mandated thing. This would be a thing that a school or a district would take on themselves to be.
And having worked with young people, in particular high school students, for enough years to know that when a particular school district would decide to take on a Civic Seal program, I think that the incentive, students are competitive. They want these extra things, especially when they're applying to colleges or for their post-secondary career. Having that extra on their diploma or their transcript is something that they're going to kind of compete with each other for. And when that begets a positive outcome, I think other school districts hopefully would be able to see that this is something that is relatively cheap and easy to do to get young people invested in the civic process without a requirement, without a lot of costs associated with it, that it is relatively easy to do after a number of districts kind of pilot the program. So I think that's certainly how I envision things working with this, and hopefully something that we can do to move forward on. Any other thoughts or questions on the concept of civic seals? Angie.
You're right about kids being competitive and wanting to brag about such things. The way I found out about the biliteracy seal was that one of my students was telling me how proud they were, and I had no idea what she was talking about. And then she explained it, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Glad they have that. So, and schools are competitive too, especially with what I would argue is unfortunate with regard to needing funding and trying to snatch kids from other schools, because then we get the, the whole thing with tuition and stuff. But that's something like my school is very proud of how many students we have who take AP, this and that, and pass. And those statistics are out there. And then parents who are like, I think I'll send my kid to that school. I think this could be another part of that equation. So some way to recognize the schools and how many kids they have with the seal might help with that. More schools want to get on board and compete, especially with schools in their dirt or schools in their area. It could be a thing. So.
Certainly anyone who has ever worked in a school or served on a school board knows exactly how much that data matters, right? To be able to say that a certain percentage of their students are earning these superlatives, it plays big. So I think you're absolutely right.
Just one more support for something that Sally said. I hope everybody here is going to be on one of these groups that we create, but I think that a conversation that we will be having with Sally, with Brian, with everybody here on what should civics really be in Connecticut? When you cut away the requirement, just what do we want for civic education? I would predict that could be a very rich conversation.
All right. So with that, is there any other discussion or questions on the idea of civic seals? Okay.
Again, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I mean, and this is not, I don't think, for a vote, but is there a general consensus in the room that this is a program that we should continue exploring? Would that be a consensus in the room?
Definitely.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Steve, for that question and kind of getting us all on the same page here. I certainly saw a lot of head nods and thumbs up, and I think this is something that we should be moving forward with. So as we go into the future meetings of this, keep that in mind. Consider, as Steve said, what do we envision as civic education in the state of Connecticut? What are the types of things we would want to see in a program, requirements, that kind of idea to move forward as we continue to discuss this. So at this point, we've come to the end of our scheduled agenda for today. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Yes, I do. Takeaways, and you just gave one takeaway and that we all agreed on. I would like to also suggest that we somehow record I think there have been a couple of other takeaways, but we haven't discussed. At the last meeting, we talked about media literacy to quite an extent. And I think we came up with a conclusion or a semi-conclusion that the best way to improve or increase media literacy would be in not necessarily another course per se, but have it picked up in small lessons continuously throughout the middle and high school education. I think that's the way we left it. And I'd like to see something, I'd like to see this task force come up with something concrete on that as a takeaway. And another takeaway, Ken, you mentioned media, you mentioned a menu of resources. And I think you brought that up at the last meeting, or somebody did, because I had it in my notes. And I think that would be very helpful too, if this task force did come up with a menu of resources that are available, the resources that we've all been talking about. those two things I would think I'd like to see added.
Thank you, Ted, and duly noted. To the point about media literacy, we are planning to have a specialist in that area, somebody, much like we had a presentation today
Oh,
on the
good.
civic seals. We're planning on potentially at our next meeting, having someone from the media literacy background to
Okay, you're
speak
way
to
ahead
us.
of me. Good.
All right.
I just
Jason.
want to say one thing, and thank you all for advancing this conversation. I think it's incredibly important. About a week and a half ago, I was in Washington, DC, attending a gathering for the National 250th Commission. And they presented some data that was collected from across the country. And I just want to share a startling data point. Compared to all other demographics, regionally, age-wise, racially, Gen Z is not particularly interested in or concerned with the 250th. I think this is a huge wake-up call and an all-hands-on-deck moment where we really need to turn the ship around.
What's the definition of Gen Z?
12 to 27, 11 to 26. This is our future.
Yeah, young people.
Yeah.
Frightening for sure.
Just on a point, for those that perhaps were not at our very first meeting, why are we here? How did we get here? Who championed this? I just like to point out Frank over there, Frank Smith, who was the legislator who did a lot of the legwork on getting this task force off the ground. So thanks again, Frank. Appreciate it.
And thank you to my good colleague, Representative Smith, for being here today so that at least we had somebody in the audience to watch us. Appreciate that. And to your wife as well. So with that, going forward, obviously, we have some points that were discussed today that hopefully we'll have in our minds and think about going into the next meeting. We'll shoot to have another meeting the end of August, about a month from now. We'll put out a date and time for that coming up shortly. And again, thank you all for your participation on this task force as we continue to advance the idea of civic education, engagement, media literacy in the state of Connecticut. So thank you all.